In the sterile halls of St. Michael's Medical Center, where egos run as high as blood pressure monitors and respect is earned through years of medical school credentials, nobody expected that a quiet nurse from a small town will become the hero of the emergency room's most challenging night. What they didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell carried more than just medical training in her scrub's pocket. She carried the heart of someone who had already faced life and death in ways these doctors could never imagine. When the ambulance sirens wailed that stormy October evening, bringing in casualties from what would later be called the worst multi-vehicle accident in the county's history, the medical staff had no idea they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about courage, skill, and what it truly means to save a life. This is the story of how prejudice crumbled in the face of extraordinary bravery, how a woman who was dismissed and mocked became the most respected person in the hospital, and how one salute from a dying hero revealed a truth that left an entire emergency room in stunned silence. Sarah Mitchell's first day at St. Michael's Medical Center began like any other Tuesday morning, except for the knot in her stomach that reminded her she was starting over in a place where she knew absolutely no one. The automatic doors of the emergency department whooshed open, and she stepped into what would either become her new home or her biggest mistake. The emergency room buzzed with its usual morning energy. Nurses moved efficiently between patient rooms. Doctors reviewed charts while sipping coffee from paper cups, and the constant background symphony of beeping monitors, ringing phones, and muffled conversations created the familiar soundtrack of a busy hospital. Sarah had worked in emergency medicine for 8 years, but walking into St. Michael's felt like being a first-year nursing student all over again. She approached the main desk where a tall, thin nurse with perfectly styled blonde hair was organizing patient files. The nameplate on the desk read Jennifer Walsh, charge nurse. Jennifer looked up with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new girl," Jennifer said, her tone carrying a subtle note that made Sarah wonder if she had already failed some test she didn't know she was taking. "Sarah Mitchell, right? From, where was it again? Some small-town hospital." "Cedar Falls Community Hospital," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady and confident. She had rehearsed this introduction multiple times during the 2-hour drive to the city, but somehow it still felt inadequate. Jennifer's smile became even more forced. "Right. Well, I'm sure it's quite an adjustment coming from a place where you probably see more farming accidents than real trauma cases. Dr. Harrison specifically requested that I show you around and get you oriented." The way Jennifer emphasized real trauma cases made Sarah's cheeks burn, but she forced herself to nod politely. She had learned long ago that first impressions in hospitals were crucial, and starting an argument on her first day would only make everything harder. As they walked through the emergency department, Jennifer pointed out the different areas with the efficiency of someone giving a tour she had given many times before. "This is our trauma bay, where we handle the serious cases. The observation units are over there for less critical patients. Supply room, medication room, break room." She paused at each location just long enough to gesture before moving on, clearly eager to finish this obligation and get back to her real work. "Now, I should probably mention," Jennifer continued as they walked, "that our doctors here are used to working with nurses who have extensive emergency experience. Dr. Harrison is particularly demanding. He doesn't have much patience for mistakes or hesitation. And Dr. Patel can be quite direct when things aren't done exactly the way he expects." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb all the information while simultaneously fighting the growing feeling that she had made a terrible mistake leaving Cedar Falls. At her previous hospital, she had been respected, trusted, and valued. Here, she was already being treated like an inexperienced rookie who might not be able to handle the pressure. Their tour was interrupted when Dr. Marcus Harrison approached them. He was a tall man in his early 40s with graying hair and the kind of confident stride that immediately announced his authority. His white coat was pristine, and he carried himself like someone who had never doubted his place in the hospital hierarchy. "Ah, our new addition, Dr. Harrison said, his eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe in a way that made her feel like he was evaluating a piece of equipment rather than meeting a new colleague. Jennifer tells me you're from a small rural hospital. I hope you understand that we operate at a much higher level here. Our patient volume is intense. Our cases are complex, and we don't have time for hand-holding. Sarah straightened her shoulders, drawing on the confidence she had built over years of handling medical emergencies. I understand, Dr. Harrison. I've been working in emergency medicine for 8 years, and I'm prepared for whatever challenges come with this position. Dr. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, and Sarah caught a hint of amusement in his expression. 8 years in a small-town hospital handling minor injuries and basic medical issues isn't quite the same as working in a Level 1 trauma center, but I suppose we'll see what you're made of soon enough. Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Raj Patel joined their group. He was younger than Dr. Harrison, probably in his mid-30s, with sharp features and an expression that suggested he was perpetually irritated by something. Is this our new nurse? I heard she's from some rural clinic. I hope she at least knows how to start and fore properly. The comment was clearly meant to be heard, and Sarah felt her face flush again. She opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Patel had already turned to Dr. Harrison. Marcus, I need you to look at the patient in bed 7. The family is asking questions I don't have time to answer repeatedly. As the two doctors walked away, Sarah heard Dr. Patel say, just loudly enough for her to hear, I don't understand why administration keeps hiring nurses from these small hospitals. They're never prepared for real emergency medicine. Jennifer looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been sympathy, but felt more like pity. Don't take it personally. They're just protective of their standards here. You'll prove yourself eventually, or... She shrugged, leaving the alternative unspoken but clear. The rest of Sarah's first day passed in a blur of learning computer systems, memorizing protocols, and trying to find her place in the complex social dynamics of the emergency department. Every interaction felt like a test, and she was acutely aware that most of her new colleagues were watching her with skeptical eyes, waiting for her to confirm their assumptions about small-town nurses. During her lunch break, Sarah sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich while reviewing the notes she had taken throughout the morning. The enormity of what she had undertaken was beginning to sink in. She had left behind a job where she was respected and valued, where she knew every doctor, nurse, and technician by name, where her opinion was sought and her experience was appreciated. Here, she was starting from zero. Worse than zero, actually, because she was starting with the assumption that she was inadequate until she proved otherwise. And proving otherwise would require not just competence, but excellence that exceeded their already low expectations. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her best friend back in Cedar Falls. How's the big city hospital treating you? Saving lives and impressing everyone, I'm sure. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. It's different than I expected, but I'm learning a lot. She didn't mention the condescending comments, the skeptical looks, or the growing doubt that was gnawing at her confidence. Instead, she finished her sandwich, threw away her trash, and headed back to the emergency department with renewed determination. The afternoon brought a steady stream of patients with various ailments and injuries. Sarah assisted with several cases, following the lead of more experienced nurses and trying to anticipate what would be needed before being asked. She noticed that the other nurses worked with efficiency that came from years of practice, their movements precise and confident as they navigated between patients and equipment. What struck her most was how differently the doctors interacted with different nurses. With Jennifer and the other veteran staff members, their conversations were collegial, even friendly. They asked for opinions, shared jokes, and treated them as respected members of the medical team. With Sarah, their interactions were strictly professional and minimal, as if they were being polite to someone they didn't expect to be around very long. As her shift was ending, Sarah was organizing supplies in one of the treatment rooms when she overheard a conversation between Dr. Harrison and Dr. Patel in the hallway. How's our new nurse working out? Dr. Patel asked. About what I expected. Dr. Harrison replied. She seems competent enough for basic tasks, but I haven't seen anything that suggests she can handle real pressure. These small-town nurses always look overwhelmed when things get intense. Should we be concerned? The last thing we need is someone freezing up during a trauma. We'll keep an eye on her. If she can't adapt quickly, we'll have to make some changes. This department can't afford weak links. Sarah's hands stilled as she listened, a mix of anger and determination flooding through her. She had dedicated her entire adult life to emergency medicine, had saved countless lives, had worked through disasters and medical crises that would challenge any healthcare professional. Yet here she was being written off as a potential weak link based on nothing more than the size of the hospital where she had previously worked. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave for the day, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would prove them wrong, not just for her own sake, but for every small-town healthcare worker who had ever been underestimated because of where they chose to serve their community. She had no way of knowing that her opportunity to do exactly that was less than 24 hours away, and that when it came, it would reveal truths about courage and character that none of her new colleagues could have imagined. The drive home to her small apartment gave her time to process the day's events. She thought about her decision to leave Cedar Falls, about the reasons that had driven her to seek new challenges in a larger hospital. It hadn't been about proving anything to anyone else. It had been about pushing herself, about growing professionally, about testing her skills in a more demanding environment. Now, though, it had become about something more. It had become about dignity, respect, and the right to be judged on her actual abilities rather than preconceived notions about where she came from. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her former supervisor from Cedar Falls Community Hospital. "Sarah, how did your first day go at the big city hospital?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. "It was educational, Dr. Peterson. Definitely different from what I'm used to. I'm sure they're lucky to have you. You were one of our best nurses, and I know you'll show them what real emergency medicine looks like." Dr. Peterson's confidence in her abilities was exactly what Sarah needed to hear, but it also highlighted the stark contrast between how she had been valued at her previous job and how she was being treated now. "Thank you. That means a lot. You know, if things don't work out there, you'll always have a place here. But I have a feeling you're going to make quite an impression on those city doctors." After ending the call, Sarah sat in her car for a few more minutes, watching the sun set behind the apartment building. Tomorrow would be another day of proving herself, another opportunity to show her new colleagues what she was capable of. She just hoped that opportunity would come in a way that allowed her to demonstrate her skills without anyone getting hurt. What she didn't know was that tomorrow would bring a test unlike anything she had ever faced, and that by the end of her second day at St. Michael's Medical Center, everyone who had doubted her abilities would see her in a completely different light. Sarah's second day at St. Michael's Medical Center began with the kind of ominous weather that seemed to predict trouble. Dark clouds had been gathering since early morning, and by the time she arrived for her evening shift, the first drops of what meteorologists were calling a significant weather event had begun to fall. The emergency department felt different during evening hours. The lighting was dimmer, the pace slightly less frantic than during the day, but there was an underlying tension that experienced healthcare workers could always sense. Evening shifts brought different kinds of emergencies. Accidents caused by tired commuters, domestic situations that escalated after people had been drinking, and the kind of trauma that seemed to happen more frequently when darkness fell. Sarah had hoped that her second day would give her more opportunities to prove herself, to show her new colleagues that their assumptions about small-town nurses were completely wrong. She arrived early, reviewed the protocol she had learned the day before, and mentally prepared herself for whatever challenges the evening might bring. Jennifer was working the charge nurse position again, and her greeting was marginally warmer than it had been the previous day. "Oh good, you're here. We're expecting a busy night. The weather service is predicting severe storms, and you know what that means." Sarah nodded. Bad weather always meant increased emergency room traffic. Car accidents, people injured by flying debris, power outages causing medical equipment failures at home. storms brought a predictable surge in patients needing immediate care. Dr. Harrison was reviewing charts at the main desk when Sarah approached to get her patient assignments. He glanced up briefly, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "How are you settling in, Mitchell?" "Very well, thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'm ready for whatever tonight brings." "Good. I've assigned you to work with Lisa Chen today. She's one of our most experienced nurses, and I want you to observe how she handles the more complex cases. Consider it continued orientation." The message was clear. Sarah was still being evaluated, still considered too inexperienced to work independently on serious cases. She accepted the assignment with a professional smile, but internally she felt frustrated by the continued lack of confidence in her abilities. Lisa Chun turned out to be a pleasant surprise. Unlike Jennifer's barely concealed condescension or the doctor's dismissive attitudes, Lisa treated Sarah like a colleague from the moment they were introduced. She was a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that spoke of years of emergency room experience. "I heard you came from a smaller hospital," Lisa said as they walked toward their assigned section of the emergency department. "That must be quite an adjustment. This place can be overwhelming even for experienced nurses when they first arrive." Sarah appreciated Lisa's straightforward approach. "It's definitely different. The volume here is much higher than what I'm used to, but the basic principles of emergency medicine are the same regardless of the size of the hospital." Lisa smiled. "Exactly. Good medicine is good medicine, whether you're treating someone in a small-town clinic or a major trauma center. The equipment might be fancier here, but the skills that matter most are the same ones you've been using all along." Their first few patients of the evening were routine cases that allowed Sarah to demonstrate her competence without the pressure of life-threatening situations. She treated a teenager who had fallen off his bicycle and needed stitches, assisted with an elderly woman experiencing chest pains that turned out to be anxiety rather than a heart attack, and helped care for a construction worker who had injured his hand with a power tool. With each case, Sarah felt her confidence returning. Her hands were steady as she started IVs, her assessment skills were sharp as she triaged incoming patients, and her communication with both patients and families was calm and reassuring. Lisa watched her work with approving nods and gradually began giving her more independence with each new case. "You're really good at this," Lisa commented after Sarah successfully calmed a frightened child who needed treatment for a severe allergic reaction. "That little girl was terrified when she came in, but you had her laughing within 5 minutes. That's a skill you can't teach in nursing school." The compliment meant more to Sarah than Lisa could have known. After a day and a half of skeptical looks and dismissive comments, it felt wonderful to have her abilities recognized by someone whose opinion clearly carried weight in the department. Around 8 o'clock, the storm that had been threatening all day arrived with full fury. The rain began falling in heavy sheets, driven by winds that rattled the hospital windows. Lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that could be heard even inside the building. The emergency department staff watched the weather through the windows with the resigned expressions of people who knew their night was about to become much more complicated. The first storm-related patients arrived within 30 minutes. A family whose car had slid off the wet road, resulting in minor injuries but major anxiety. An elderly man whose power had gone out, causing his oxygen concentrator to stop working. A woman who had been struck by a falling tree branch while trying to secure items in her yard. Sarah worked efficiently alongside Lisa, treating patients and preparing for what they all knew would be a long night. The storm showed no signs of abating, and experience had taught them that the worst accidents usually happen during the peak of severe weather events. Dr. Harrison moved through the department with increased intensity, checking on patients and coordinating care with his usual efficiency. Sarah noticed that he seemed more focused on the medical tasks at hand and less concerned with evaluating her performance. Crisis situations had a way of stripping away everything except the essential work of saving lives. Dr. Patel was covering the trauma bay, his earlier irritability replaced by the sharp concentration that came with anticipating serious injuries. The entire emergency department had shifted into a higher gear, with all staff preparing for the influx of patients that severe weather inevitably brought. At 9:15, the lights in the emergency department flickered briefly as a particularly strong gust of wind hit the building. The backup generators kicked in automatically, but the momentary interruption served as a reminder of how vulnerable even a major hospital could be when nature decided to demonstrate its power. It was at 9:37 when everything changed. The call came in over the radio system that connected the hospital to emergency services throughout the county. Sarah was helping Lisa with a patient who had cut himself on flying glass when she heard the dispatcher's voice cutting through the usual background noise of the emergency department. St. Michael's Medical Center, this is County Dispatch. We have a major vehicle incident on Highway 27 near the Morrison Bridge. Multiple vehicles involved, unknown number of casualties. Weather conditions are severely hampering rescue efforts. First units on scene are reporting at least 6 vehicles involved, possibly more. This is going to be a mass casualty event. The word sent a chill through the emergency department that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. Mass casualty events were every hospital's nightmare scenario. Situations where the number of patients requiring immediate care exceeded the facility's normal capacity to provide it. Dr. Harrison immediately activated the hospital's mass casualty protocol. I need all available staff to report to the emergency department immediately. Cancel all elective procedures and prepare to receive multiple trauma patients. Jennifer, start setting up additional treatment areas. Lisa, get the trauma bays ready for the most critical cases. The transformation of the emergency department was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, staff members were arriving from other parts of the hospital. Additional beds were being wheeled into previously empty spaces. Medical equipment was being moved and reorganized, and everyone was preparing for an influx of patients that would test the limits of their training and resources. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but it wasn't fear. It was the familiar adrenaline rush that came with knowing she was about to face the kind of medical challenge that defined emergency nursing. This was exactly the kind of situation that had drawn her to emergency medicine in the first place, the moment when all her training and experience would be put to the ultimate test. How many patients are we expecting? Lisa asked Dr. Harrison as they prepared the trauma bay. Unknown at this time. The weather is making it difficult for rescue teams to get a clear picture of the scene. Could be anywhere from 10 to 20 patients with varying degrees of injury. We're also the only major trauma center within 50 miles, so we'll be receiving not just local casualties, but also patients from other hospitals that don't have the capacity to handle this level of trauma. Jennifer appeared at Sarah's side with a clipboard and a grim expression. Sarah, I'm assigning you to assist Dr. Patel in Trauma Bay 2. Just follow his lead and try not to get in the way. This isn't like anything you've dealt with before. The dismissive tone was unmistakable, and Sarah felt a flash of anger. Even in the midst of preparing for a mass casualty event, Jennifer couldn't resist reminding her that she was considered the weak link in their team. But Sarah pushed the anger aside and focused on what really mattered, the patients who were about to arrive needing their help. At 10:05, the first ambulance arrived. The paramedic who burst through the emergency department doors was soaked from the rain and spoke in the rapid, clipped sentences of someone who had been dealing with chaos for the past 30 minutes. 32-year-old male, driver of the initial vehicle that lost control. Multiple trauma, possible internal bleeding, vitals unstable. The patient was wheeled directly into Trauma Bay 1, where Dr. Harrison and his team immediately began the complex process of assessment and stabilization. Sarah caught a glimpse of the injured man as they passed. Young, unconscious, with visible injuries that suggested the impact had been severe. The second ambulance arrived less than 2 minutes later, followed by a third, and then a fourth. The emergency department, filled with the controlled chaos of multiple medical teams working simultaneously to save lives. Each ambulance brought new patients with different injuries, different levels of urgency, different chances of survival. Sarah found herself assigned to help care for a middle-aged woman who had been a passenger in one of the vehicles involved in the accident. The woman was conscious, but clearly in pain, with what appeared to be a broken arm and possible internal injuries. "Ma'am, my name is Sarah, and I'm going to take very good care of you," Sarah said as she began her assessment. "Can you tell me your name?" "Margaret. Margaret Thompson," the woman replied through gritted teeth. "My husband, was he brought here too? We were driving home from our daughter's house when the accident happened." Sarah glanced at Dr. Patel, who was examining Margaret's injuries. "We'll find out about your husband as soon as we can. Right now, I need you to focus on staying calm while we take care of you." As Sarah worked to stabilize Margaret Thompson, she was aware that the emergency department around her was functioning at a level of intensity she had never experienced before. Every available staff member was caring for patients, every piece of equipment was in use, and the sound of medical alarms and urgent conversations filled the air. But what struck her most was how naturally she was falling into the rhythm of crisis medicine. Her hands were steady as she started in 4. Her voice was calm as she reassured frightened patients, and her mind was clear as she prioritized care based on each patient's needs. This was emergency nursing at its most demanding, and she was meeting that demand without hesitation. She had no way of knowing that the most challenging patient of the night had not yet arrived, and that when he did, everything she thought she knew about earning respect and proving herself would pale in comparison to what was about to happen. By 11 o'clock, the emergency department at St. Michael's Medical Center looked like a battlefield medical station. Every available space had been converted into a treatment area, and the staff moved between patients with a focused intensity of people who knew that lives depended on their efficiency and skill. Sarah had been working nonstop for over an hour, moving from patient to patient as needed, assisting doctors with procedures, starting IVs, monitoring vital signs, and providing the kind of comprehensive care that required both technical skill and emotional strength. With each case, she felt more confident, more integrated into the team, more like the experienced emergency nurse she had always known herself to be. Margaret Thompson, the woman Sarah had been primarily caring for, had been stabilized and was awaiting surgery for internal injuries that were serious but not life-threatening. Her husband had indeed been brought to the hospital and was being treated in a different trauma bay for a concussion and broken ribs. Sarah had been able to reunite them briefly before Margaret was taken to the operating room, and the relief on both their faces had reminded her why she loved emergency nursing despite all its challenges. Dr. Patel had begun to treat Sarah differently as the evening progressed. Whereas earlier interactions had been dismissive and skeptical, his comments now carried a note of professional respect. "Good catch on the potential pneumothorax with the patient in bed 12, he had said after Sarah had noticed subtle signs that the man's lung might have been punctured. That could have been missed until it became critical. Even Dr. Harrison had acknowledged her contributions. When she had successfully calmed a hysterical patient long enough for him to perform a necessary procedure, he had nodded approvingly. "Nice work, Mitchell. That patient was going to be impossible to treat until you got her settled." Jennifer, however, remained coolly professional but distant. Sarah had noticed that while the charge nurse was clearly competent at organizing the chaos of a mass casualty event, she seemed uncomfortable with giving Sarah credit for her contributions. When Dr. Patel had specifically requested Sarah's assistance with a complex case, Jennifer had hesitated before agreeing, as if reluctant to acknowledge that the new nurse might actually be valuable to the team. The storm outside continued to rage with undiminished fury. Lightning still illuminated the sky at regular intervals, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. The emergency department windows revealed a parking lot where ambulances continued to arrive and depart, their flashing lights creating an otherworldly atmosphere that emphasized the seriousness of everything happening inside the hospital. It was at 11:23 when the call came in that changed everything. "St. Michael's Medical Center, this is Ambulance 7. The voice crackled over the radio. "We have a single vehicle accident victim, approximately 2 miles from the hospital. Male, mid-40s, found unconscious in his vehicle after sliding off the road during the storm." Lisa Chun was coordinating radio communications and responded immediately. "Ambulance 7, what is the patient's condition?" There was a pause before the paramedic's voice came back, and Sarah could hear something different in his tone, a combination of urgency and confusion that suggested this case was not routine. The patient appears to have significant trauma, but we're also seeing some unusual circumstances. He's wearing what looks like a military uniform, and there are items in his vehicle that suggest he may be active duty or recent military. We found military identification. Dr. Harrison looked up from the patient he was treating. What's his current status? Unconscious, possible head trauma, breathing is labored, pulse is weak but present. We're about 8 minutes out. Prepare Trauma Bay 3, Dr. Harrison called out, and get someone to contact the military liaison office. If this patient is active duty, we'll need to notify his command. Sarah was helping to set up Trauma Bay 3 when Jennifer approached with a clipboard, and that familiar expression of barely concealed doubt. Sarah, Dr. Harrison wants you to assist with this patient, but I want you to understand that this could be extremely serious. Military personnel often have complex medical histories, and if he's recently returned from deployment, there could be complications we're not immediately aware of. The condescending tone was unmistakable, but Sarah simply nodded. I understand. I'm prepared to assist however needed. Just remember that this isn't a routine case. If you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about anything, step back and let more experienced nurses handle it. Before Sarah could respond, the automatic doors of the emergency department burst open, and the paramedics rushed in with their patient. Sarah got her first look at the unconscious man on the stretcher, and something about him immediately struck her as different from the other accident victims they had treated that evening. He was tall and powerfully built, with the kind of physical conditioning that spoke of serious athletic training or military fitness. His dark hair was cut in a precise military style, and even unconscious, there was something about his bearing that suggested authority and discipline. His uniform was indeed military, Navy, Sarah realized, though she couldn't immediately identify his specific rank or unit. But it was his face that captured her attention. Despite being unconscious and injured, there was something about his features that suggested both strength and compassion, the kind of person who was used to taking responsibility and making difficult decisions under pressure. Dr. Harrison immediately took charge of the case. What do we have? The paramedic began his report as they transferred the patient to the hospital bed. John Mitchell, age 44, Navy SEAL commander according to his identification. Single vehicle accident during the storm. Vehicle left the road and struck a tree at high speed. Patient was unconscious when we arrived, appears to have significant head trauma. Vitals have been unstable during transport. Sarah felt a jolt of recognition at the name, though she couldn't immediately place where she had heard it before. The title Navy SEAL Commander certainly explained the man's physical condition and bearing, but there's something else, something that made her feel like she should know who this person was. Dr. Harrison began his examination while Sarah and the other medical staff connected monitors and prepared to assess the full extent of the patient's injuries. Pupils are unequal and sluggish, Dr. Harrison reported. Possible traumatic brain injury. We need a CT scan immediately and call neurosurgery for consultation. As they worked to stabilize Commander Mitchell, Sarah found herself studying his face more closely. There was definitely something familiar about him, though she couldn't identify what it was. She had never met any Navy SEALs, and she certainly didn't know any military commanders personally. But the feeling persisted that this man was important, that he was someone she should recognize. Sarah, I need you to start a second four line, Dr. Harrison called out. His blood pressure is dropping, and we need better vascular access. Sarah moved smoothly to comply, her hands steady as she prepared the four equipment. As she worked, she became aware that Commander Mitchell's breathing was becoming more labored, and his vital signs were showing signs of serious distress. Dr. Harrison, his oxygen saturation is dropping, she reported. Dr. Harrison looked at the monitors with concern. We may need to intubate. Get the equipment ready. As Sarah prepared the intubation equipment, she noticed something that made her pause. On the patient's chest, visible through his partially opened uniform shirt, was a small tattoo. It was a simple design, but one that she recognized immediately because she had seen it many times before. It was a memorial tattoo, the kind that military personnel often got to honor fallen comrades. This particular tattoo showed a date from several years ago and the initials KR. But what made Sarah's heart skip a beat was the small additional inscription below the initials, Cedar Falls Angel. Suddenly, Sarah knew exactly who Commander John Mitchell was. 3 years ago, Cedar Falls Community Hospital had treated a young soldier named Kevin Rodriguez who had been critically injured in a training accident. He had been visiting family in the area when the accident occurred, and Sarah had been his primary nurse during his week-long stay in the intensive care unit. Kevin had been touch and go for several days, and Sarah had spent countless hours at his bedside, not just providing medical care, but also talking with him about his military service, his fears, and his hopes for the future. Kevin had told her about his commanding officer, a Navy SEAL commander named John Mitchell, who had personally visited every family member of every sailor under his command who had been injured or killed. Kevin had described Commander Mitchell as the kind of leader who never asked his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself, who knew the names of all their children, who attended every funeral and visited every hospital room. Kevin had also told her that Commander Mitchell had a tradition of getting memorial tattoos for every service member he lost, and that he called the healthcare workers who went above and beyond for his sailors angels. Kevin had promised to tell his commander about the Cedar Falls Angel who had helped save his life. Sarah had never expected to meet the man Kevin had described with such reverence and affection. She had certainly never imagined that she would meet him under these circumstances, fighting for his life in an emergency room where her colleagues questioned her abilities. But there was no time to process the emotional implications of this recognition. Commander Mitchell's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Dr. Harrison was preparing to perform the intubation that might save his life. "Sarah, I need you to assist with this procedure," Dr. Harrison said. "His airway is compromising, and we need to move quickly." As Sarah positioned herself to help with the intubation, she felt a strange sense of purpose that went beyond her professional responsibilities. This wasn't just another patient who needed her care. This was a commander that Kevin Rodriguez had described as a hero, a leader who had dedicated his life to serving others and protecting his sailors. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man whose sailor she had helped save 3 years ago in a small-town hospital was now depending on her skills in a big-city emergency room, where she was still fighting to prove herself worthy of respect. "Sarah, hand me the laryngoscope," Dr. Harrison said, his voice tense with concentration. As Sarah passed him the instrument, she noticed that Commander Mitchell's eyes had opened briefly. For just a moment, he seemed to focus on her face, and she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his gaze. But then his eyes closed again, and Dr. Harrison was inserting the breathing tube that would keep him alive. The procedure was successful, and Commander Mitchell's oxygen levels began to improve immediately. But Sarah could see from the monitors that his condition remained critical. He would need surgery, probably multiple surgeries, and his recovery would depend on the quality of care he received in the next few hours. As the medical team worked to stabilize him for transport to the operating room, Sarah found herself thinking about Kevin Rodriguez and the stories he had told her about his commander. If even half of what Kevin had said was true, this man lying unconscious before them had saved countless lives and had earned the loyalty and admiration of everyone who served under him. Now, it was her turn to try to save his life, and she was determined to give him the same level of care that he had given to the sailors who depended on him. But first, she had to figure out how to convince the surgical team that the small-town nurse from Cedar Falls might actually have something valuable to contribute to his care. What she didn't know was that Commander Mitchell's arrival at St. Michael's Medical Center was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only test her medical skills, but also reveal truths about courage, loyalty, and respect that would change how everyone in that emergency room saw both her and themselves. Commander John Mitchell was wheeled into surgery at 12:30 in the morning, and Sarah found herself experiencing an emotional intensity that surprised her with its strength. She had cared for thousands of patients over her 8-year career, had seen people at their most vulnerable moments, had fought to save lives that hung in the balance between hope and despair. But something about this case felt different, more personal, though she couldn't fully explain why to herself. As the surgical team took over Commander Mitchell's care, Sarah returned to helping with the remaining patients from the multi-vehicle accident. The emergency department was still busy, though the initial chaos had settled into the steady rhythm of efficient medical care. The storm outside was finally beginning to weaken, and the flow of new patients was slowing to a manageable pace. Dr. Harrison found Sarah restocking supplies in one of the treatment rooms about an hour after Commander Mitchell had been taken to surgery. "Good work tonight, Mitchell," he said, and Sarah noticed that his tone carried a respect that hadn't been there 2 days earlier. "You've handled everything we've thrown at you with real professionalism." "Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'm glad I could contribute to the team effort." Dr. Harrison studied her for a moment with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering some of his earlier assumptions. "That military patient, Commander Mitchell, you seemed particularly focused on his care. Do you have military experience yourself?" Sarah shook her head. "No military experience, but I did treat one of his sailors a few years ago at my previous hospital. A young man named Kevin Rodriguez who was injured in a training accident. Commander Mitchell had a reputation among his personnel as an exceptional leader." "That's interesting. Well, his surgery is going to be touch and go. The neurosurgeon found significant brain swelling, and they're working to relieve the pressure. The next 24 hours will be critical." As Dr. Harrison walked away, Sarah felt a weight of responsibility that went beyond her normal professional obligations. She knew she couldn't do anything to directly influence the surgical outcome, but she found herself hoping desperately that the man who had meant so much to Kevin Rodriguez would survive this night. The rest of her shift passed quietly, with just a few minor cases that required attention. As dawn approached and the day's shift began to arrive, Sarah realized that she had successfully completed her most challenging day as an emergency nurse. She had worked through a mass casualty event, had proven her competence under extreme pressure, and had earned what seemed like genuine respect from doctors who had questioned her abilities just 48 hours earlier. Jennifer approached her as she was preparing to leave for the day. "Sarah, I wanted to tell you that you did good work tonight. I may have underestimated what you could contribute here." The apology was grudging and incomplete, but it was more than Sarah had expected. "Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Dr. Harrison specifically asked that you be assigned to Commander Mitchell's care when he comes out of surgery. Apparently, he was impressed with how you handled his case in the emergency room." Sarah felt a surge of professional pride mixed with personal concern. "I'll be honored to care for him." As Sarah drove home through the early morning streets, still damp from the storm that had finally passed, she reflected on how much had changed in just 2 days. She had arrived at St. Michael's Medical Center feeling like an outsider who had to prove herself worthy of respect. Now, after the most demanding night of her career, she was being specifically requested to care for one of the most important patients the hospital had seen in months. But her satisfaction with her professional accomplishments was overshadowed by her worry about Commander Mitchell's condition. Throughout the morning, as she tried to sleep, she found herself thinking about Kevin Rodriguez's stories of his commander's dedication to his sailors, his personal involvement in their lives, his willingness to sacrifice his own comfort and safety for their welfare. Sarah's phone rang at 2 in the afternoon, waking her from an uneasy sleep. The caller ID showed the hospital's main number. "Sarah, this is Dr. Harrison. I know you're not scheduled to work until tomorrow, but I wanted to update you on Commander Mitchell's condition. He came through surgery, but he's still critical. More importantly, we've been contacted by his unit, and apparently this man is something of a legend in the Navy SEAL community. We're expecting visits from some very high-ranking military officials." Sarah sat up in bed, fully awake now. "How is he responding?" "Better than expected, actually. The brain swelling is under control, and he's showing signs of neurological improvement. But he's still unconscious, and the next few days will determine whether he makes a full recovery." I'll be there tonight, as scheduled. Good. And, Sarah, I meant what I said about your work last night. You've proven that small-town experience doesn't mean small-town skills. I apologize if my initial assessment was unfair. After ending the call, Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon researching everything she could find about Navy SEAL Commander John Mitchell. What she discovered amazed and humbled her in equal measure. Commander Mitchell was indeed a legend in the special operations community. He had led some of the most dangerous missions of the past decade, had been decorated multiple times for valor under fire, and was known throughout the military for his unwavering commitment to the welfare of his personnel. But what impressed Sarah most were the stories about his character. How he had personally paid for the college education of the children of sailors killed under his command, how he had spent his own leave time visiting wounded veterans in hospitals around the country, how he had never asked anyone to take a risk he wouldn't take himself. One article she found included a quote from a former sailor who had served under Commander Mitchell. He's the kind of leader who makes you want to be better than you thought you could be. When he says that something matters, you believe it. When he says you can do something, you find a way to do it. He sees potential in people that they don't see in themselves. Reading those words, Sarah understood why Kevin Rodriguez had spoken about his commander with such reverence. This was a man who dedicated his life to bringing out the best in others, who believed in people even when they didn't believe in themselves. When Sarah arrived for her shift that evening, she went directly to the intensive care unit where Commander Mitchell had been transferred after surgery. The ICU was a quieter, more controlled environment than the emergency department, with individual rooms for each patient and sophisticated monitoring equipment that tracked every vital sign in real time. Commander Mitchell lay motionless in bed, connected to multiple machines that were keeping his body functioning while his brain healed from the trauma. His head was bandaged from the surgery, and his face was pale but peaceful. Despite the medical equipment surrounding him, he still projected the same sense of strength and authority that Sarah had noticed in the emergency room. Dr. Sarah Chun, the intensivist in charge of his care, briefed Sarah on his current condition. His vital signs are stable, and the brain swelling continues to decrease. We're cautiously optimistic, but brain injuries are unpredictable. He could wake up tomorrow completely normal, or he could remain unconscious for weeks. As Sarah began her shift caring for Commander Mitchell, she found herself talking to him despite his unconscious state. Medical literature suggested that unconscious patients might be aware of their surroundings, and she wanted him to know that he was receiving the best possible care. Commander Mitchell, my name is Sarah, and I'm going to be taking care of you tonight. I want you to know that Kevin Rodriguez sends his regards. He told me all about you 3 years ago when he was a patient at my previous hospital. He said you were the best commanding officer in the Navy, and that you never gave up on any of your sailors. Throughout the evening, Sarah provided the kind of comprehensive nursing care that required both technical expertise and emotional investment. She monitored his vital signs, adjusted his medications, turned him regularly to prevent complications, and maintained the delicate balance of treatments that would give his brain the best chance to heal. At around 10 o'clock, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Commander Mitchell's eyelids fluttered slightly, and his breathing pattern changed in a way that suggested he might be approaching consciousness. Commander Mitchell, can you hear me? Sarah leaned closer to his bed, watching for any sign of response. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually becoming more alert as he tried to process his surroundings. When his gaze finally settled on Sarah's face, she saw immediate confusion followed by what looked like recognition. Where his voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier that day. You're in St. Michael's Medical Center. You were in a car accident during the storm, but you're going to be okay. Just try to stay calm and let your body rest. Commander Mitchell tried to speak again, but the effort seemed to exhaust him. His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again, this time focusing more clearly on Sarah. I know you, he whispered, his voice slightly stronger than before. Sarah felt her breath catch. I don't think we've met, Commander, but I did treat one of your sailors a few years ago. Kevin Rodriguez. He spoke about you often during his recovery. At the mention of Kevin's name, Commander Mitchell's eyes became more alert, and Sarah could see him making the mental connection. Kevin, Cedar Falls, the angel nurse. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Kevin had actually told his commander about her, had remembered their conversations about how much Commander Mitchell meant to his sailors. Kevin told me about you too, Sarah said softly. He said you were the kind of leader who never gave up on people, who saw potential in them even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Commander Mitchell tried to nod, a slight movement that took considerable effort in his weakened state. Kevin, how is he? He recovered completely from his injuries. He sent me a message last year saying he had been promoted and was doing well. He credits you with giving him the strength to get through his recovery. For the first time since waking up, Commander Mitchell smiled slightly. Good kid. Always had more courage than he realized. As the night progressed, Commander Mitchell drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he woke up, he seemed a little stronger, a little more aware of his surroundings. During his lucid moments, he and Sarah talked quietly about Kevin Rodriguez, about military medicine, about the challenges of caring for people in high-stress situations. What struck Sarah most about these conversations was how Commander Mitchell, even in his weakened condition, showed genuine interest in her experiences as a nurse. He asked thoughtful questions about her decision to move to a larger hospital, about the challenges of emergency medicine, about her goals for professional growth. Kevin was right about you, he said during one of their conversations. You have the gift of making people feel like they matter, like someone genuinely cares about their welfare. That's rarer than you might think, even in healthcare. At around 3 in the morning, Commander Mitchell had been awake and alert for nearly an hour, the longest period of consciousness since his surgery. Dr. Chun had examined him and pronounced his neurological function remarkably improved for someone who had undergone brain surgery less than 24 hours earlier. As Sarah was adjusting his pillows to make him more comfortable, Commander Mitchell reached out and gently took her hand. Sarah, I want you to know that Kevin wasn't exaggerating when he called you an angel. What you did for him went far beyond medical care. You gave him hope when he needed it most, and you treated him like he was your own family. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. I just did my job, Commander. No, he said firmly, his voice carrying an authority that even serious injuries couldn't diminish. You did much more than your job. You cared for him as a person, not just as a patient. That kind of compassion can't be taught or mandated. It comes from who you are as a human being. As dawn approached and Sarah's shift was ending, Commander Mitchell was sleeping peacefully, his vital signs stable, and his neurological function continuing to improve. The doctors were now confident that he would make a full recovery, though it would require weeks of rehabilitation and careful monitoring. Dr. Harrison found Sarah completing her notes in Commander Mitchell's room. How has he been tonight? Remarkably well. He's been conscious and alert for several hours, and his neurological responses are excellent. Dr. Chun is very pleased with his progress. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly. Good. I have to say, Sarah, you've shown exceptional care with this patient. Commander Mitchell specifically asked that you continue to be assigned to his care during his recovery. As Sarah prepared to leave for the day, she realized that something fundamental had changed during the past 3 days. She had arrived at St. Michael's Medical Center feeling like she had to prove herself worthy of respect. Instead, through caring for patients who needed her skills and compassion, she had discovered that she had never needed anyone else's permission to be the excellent nurse she had always been. The real validation hadn't come from impressing skeptical doctors or earning grudging approval from condescending colleagues. It had come from doing what she had always done, providing exceptional care to people who needed it, treating every patient as someone worthy of her very best efforts, and never compromising her commitment to healing and compassion. But the most profound moment of validation was yet to come, and when it happened, it would be witnessed by everyone who had ever questioned whether a small-town nurse deserved a place among big-city medical professionals. 3 days after Commander Mitchell's accident, St. Michael's Medical Center received visitors unlike any the hospital had ever seen before. Word had spread through military channels about the condition and location of one of the Navy's most respected SEAL commanders, and the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Sarah arrived for her shift to find a hospital parking lot filled with vehicles bearing military license plates and official government tags. Security had been increased, and she noticed several men and women in dress uniforms moving purposefully through the hospital corridors. The atmosphere was tense with the kind of respectful urgency that accompanied visits from very important people. Commander Mitchell had been transferred from the intensive care unit to a private room in the medical wing, where his recovery could continue in a more comfortable environment while still allowing for the specialized monitoring his condition required. Sarah had been specifically assigned as his primary nurse, a designation that Dr. Harrison had explained was not just a medical decision, but also a recognition of the exceptional rapport she had developed with this critical patient. When Sarah entered Commander Mitchell's room that morning, she found him sitting up in bed for the first time since his surgery, looking significantly stronger than he had just 24 hours earlier. His color was better, his eyes were clear and alert, and he was reading what appeared to be military correspondence that someone had brought to him. "Good morning, Commander. You're looking much better today." He looked up with a smile that transformed his serious features. "I feel much better, thanks to the excellent care I've been receiving. Sarah, I understand that half the Navy is planning to visit me today. I apologize in advance for any disruption this might cause to your normal routine." Sarah adjusted his fore and checked his monitors as they talked. "No apology necessary. I'm honored to be caring for someone who means so much to so many people. The stories I've been hearing about you from your visiting colleagues have been remarkable. I hope they haven't been exaggerating too much. Military people have a tendency to make everything sound more dramatic than it actually was." Before Sarah could respond, there was a soft knock on the door, and Dr. Harrison entered, followed by a man in a Navy dress uniform with more ribbons and insignia than Sarah had ever seen in one place. The visitor was clearly a very senior officer, probably an admiral based on the way Dr. Harrison was treating him with unusual deference. "Commander Mitchell, this is Admiral Richardson, who flew in specifically to check on your condition," Dr. Harrison said. Admiral Richardson approached the bed with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, but also with obvious personal concern for Commander Mitchell's welfare. "John, you gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Much better, sir, thanks to outstanding medical care. The doctors and nurses here have been exceptional." Admiral Richardson turned to Dr. Harrison. "Doctor, I want to personally thank you and your staff for the care you provided to Commander Mitchell. The Navy considers him one of our most valuable assets, and knowing he's receiving the best possible treatment means everything to his sailors and to the service." Dr. Harrison accepted the praise graciously, then gestured towards Sarah. "Admiral, I'd like you to meet Sarah Mitchell, Commander Mitchell's primary nurse. She's been instrumental in his care and recovery." Sarah felt slightly overwhelmed as the Admiral turned his attention to her. "Nurse Mitchell, Commander Mitchell has been telling everyone who will listen about the exceptional care you've provided. On behalf of the United States Navy, thank you for your dedication and professionalism." What happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Sarah herself. Commander Mitchell struggled to move from his sitting position, clearly intending to get out of bed despite his recent surgery and ongoing recovery. "Commander, please don't try to get up," Sarah said, immediately moving to help him settle back into bed. But Commander Mitchell gently but firmly resisted her assistance. "Sarah, please. This is important." With considerable effort and obvious discomfort, Commander Mitchell managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed and stand up, using the bed rail for support. His movements were slow and careful but determined. Admiral Richardson and Dr. Harrison watched in amazement as the injured SEAL commander straightened to his full height, despite the obvious pain the movement caused him. "Commander, what are you doing?" Admiral Richardson asked with concern. Commander Mitchell looked directly at Sarah with an expression of profound respect and gratitude. "Admiral, 3 years ago, this nurse saved the life of one of my sailors in a small hospital in Cedar Falls. She provided not just medical care, but also hope and compassion to a young man who was fighting for his life far from home. Today, she's provided the same level of care to me, treating me not as a patient, but as a person worthy of her very best efforts. Sarah felt her eyes filling with tears as she realized what was happening around them. The room had become completely silent except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Commander Mitchell continued, his voice strong despite his physical weakness. In my 20 years of military service, I've learned to recognize exceptional people who go above and beyond what duty requires. This woman represents everything that is noble about the healthcare profession: skill, compassion, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the welfare of others. With obvious effort but unmistakable determination, Commander Mitchell raised his right hand and rendered a full military salute to Sarah Mitchell. The salute was crisp and precise, executed with the kind of military bearing that years of service had ingrained in him, and it was held for several long seconds that seemed to stretch into eternity. Admiral Richardson's eyes widened with surprise and understanding, and he immediately came to attention and rendered his own salute to Sarah. Dr. Harrison stood frozen, clearly not understanding the full significance of what was happening, but recognizing that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Nurse Sarah Mitchell, Commander Mitchell said formally, I salute you for your service to the men and women who serve our country, for your dedication to healing and compassion, and for representing the very best of what it means to care for others. Sarah stood overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face, not knowing how to respond to this unprecedented honor. She had never been in the military, had never expected or sought recognition for simply doing her job with the dedication she had always considered normal. But the profound respect being shown to her by these two senior naval officers was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The moment was interrupted by movement at the door. Word of what was happening had somehow spread through the hospital, and Sarah turned to see Dr. Patel, Jennifer Walsh, Lisa Chun, and several other staff members crowding into the doorway, their faces showing various degrees of amazement and confusion. Jennifer in particular looked stunned, her expression cycling between disbelief and dawning understanding. The nurse who had dismissed Sarah as inadequately prepared for real emergency medicine was watching a Navy SEAL commander and a full admiral saluting the small-town nurse she had condescended to just days earlier. Commander Mitchell finally lowered his salute but remained standing despite the obvious effort it required. Admiral, I want the record to show that Nurse Mitchell provided care that exceeded every expectation. She treated Kevin Rodriguez and me not as obligations, but as people whose lives mattered to her personally. That level of compassion and professional excellence deserves recognition. Admiral Richardson nodded approvingly. Commander, I've already made note of Nurse Mitchell's exceptional service. The Navy doesn't forget people who go above and beyond for our personnel. As Commander Mitchell finally allowed Sarah to help him back into bed, she noticed that the small crowd at the door had grown larger. Word was spreading through the hospital that something remarkable was happening in room 314, and staff members were finding excuses to walk past and see what was going on. Dr. Harrison, who had been unusually quiet during this entire exchange, finally spoke. Commander Mitchell, I have to say that this is unprecedented in my 20 years of hospital administration. We've had many distinguished patients, but I've never seen anything like what just happened here. Commander Mitchell settled back against his pillows, clearly exhausted by the effort of standing and saluting, but his eyes remained bright with satisfaction. Doctor, in the military, we have a saying that you should never leave good work unrecognized. Sarah Mitchell's care has been exemplary, and she deserves to know that her efforts are noticed and appreciated. Over the next hour, as word continued to spread through the hospital, Sarah found herself receiving visits from staff members who had heard about the salute. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine respect for what they had witnessed, but all of them seemed to view her differently than they had just a few days earlier. Jennifer Walsh was among the visitors, and her conversation with Sarah was awkward but significant. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your abilities based on where you came from rather than observing what you could actually do. That was unprofessional and unfair." Dr. Patel also stopped by, his manner notably different from their first interactions. "I heard about what happened here today. Commander Mitchell is clearly someone who doesn't give praise lightly. You've earned something that most healthcare providers never receive: recognition from someone who truly understands the value of exceptional service." But the most meaningful conversation came from Lisa Chun, who had been supportive of Sarah from the beginning. "You know, what happened here today wasn't really about proving yourself to any of us. It was about a patient recognizing that you gave him the same level of care you would give to anyone, regardless of who they were or what they had done. That's the mark of a truly great nurse." As Sarah's shift ended and she prepared to leave for the day, Commander Mitchell called her over to his bed one final time. "Sarah, I want you to understand something important. That salute wasn't just personal recognition. It was professional acknowledgement that you represent the best of what healthcare can be. Kevin Rodriguez was right when he called you an angel, but you're more than that. You're a reminder that healing involves more than medical procedures. It requires compassion, dedication, and the ability to see every patient as someone worthy of your very best efforts." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the events of the day and by the recognition that had come from such an unexpected source. "Commander, I just did what any good nurse would do." "No," he said firmly. "You did what an exceptional nurse does. There's a difference, and it's a difference that makes all the difference in the world." As Sarah walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, she reflected on the incredible journey of the past week. She had arrived at St. Michael's Medical Center feeling like she had to prove herself worthy of respect. Instead, she had discovered that she had always been worthy of respect, and that the validation she sought had to come from her own commitment to excellence rather than from other people's opinions. The salute from Commander Mitchell would become legendary in the hospital, talked about for years as the day when a small-town nurse received military honors for the simple act of providing exceptional care. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't in the recognition she had received. It was in the realization that she had never needed anyone's permission to be excellent, that her value as a healthcare professional wasn't determined by other people's preconceptions, and that the most important recognition came from patients whose lives were made better by her care. She had left Cedar Falls to test herself in a more challenging environment, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. But the success hadn't come from adapting to a new hospital's culture or from proving skeptical colleagues wrong. It had come from being exactly who she had always been, a nurse who treated every patient as if their life and well-being mattered more than anything else in the world. And in the end, that was the only validation that truly mattered. 6 months later, Commander Mitchell would make a complete recovery and return to active duty. He would never forget the nurse who had cared for him during his darkest hours, and he would make sure that Sarah's story was told throughout the military medical community as an example of what exceptional healthcare looked like. But that's another story. For now, it was enough that a small-town nurse had discovered that excellence speaks for itself, that compassion transcends all boundaries, and that the greatest honor any healthcare provider can receive is the respect of someone whose life they have touched through their dedication to healing and hope.